Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. It is Friday, February 18th. It is Femme Friday. We're doing a little different type of show today. We have two great interviews. Of course, as usual, we will have a great interview with Sophie Hurwitz talking about Amazon workers, and Natasha Lennard, who has been on before. She's a columnist for the Intercept. But we're also going to air an interview that we did yesterday, which is very timely and one of the reasons why we wanted to put it on the main show. And is with Steven Donziger, who has been on the show multiple times to discuss the prosecution against him for winning a case against Chevron, a $9.58 billion case against Chevron, and they are going after him. Well, they did something else in the last week that is pretty egregious and unheard of, and we're going to talk to him about that a little bit later in the show. But first, I want this is making the rounds. I guess I went a little viral, as the kids say, yesterday for an appearance I did on Fox News in the morning, in which I was asked to go on to talk about wokeism and how wokeism and AOC's party are like, they're going so far woke that they're going to lose in the midterms. I wasn't accepting that because I don't think that is the biggest crisis of our time. But, you know, I'll play the clip. Let's play the clip and I'll tell you what my tactic was here. Because, you know, it is tough going on Fox, and I'm very, very used to being on the show. It's a little harder when you're doing it virtually than in person. But I do know, you know, this host pretty well, and I know how far I can push her. But with that being said, the conversation definitely went in a different direction. And I think that's why it abruptly ended. Let's play this clip.
Democrats who are afraid the party's going too far.
Too many Democrats just don't speak in terms of the average American comprehending what they're saying.
The Democrats have got to step away from the super wokeness. I mean, San Francisco really tells what's going on. If you give the Republicans the ability to point to Democrats as this super woke culture focused on the wrong things that don't matter to voters, you're going to lose. And it's that simple.
That was two super wokes. The Wall Street Journal editorial board writes it this way: if it can happen in San Francisco, of all places, Democrats should be worried. They need to escape their union bondage and woke fixations. Republicans have a great opportunity to press parental choice on curriculum, charters, and vouchers. The woke may wake up to a far bigger shock in November. Power panel now. T.W. Shannon, former Black Voices for Trump co-chair and former Speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. Nomiki Konst, host of The Nomiki Show and a former national surrogate for Bernie Sanders. It is great to have you both. Let's kick it off. T.W. Woke is on its way out if they're not careful, Democrats. Why?
Yeah, there's no question, Harris. I mean, listen, I wish I could take full credit for this as a conservative in the Midwest part of the country, but the reality is the COVIDian tyrants did this to themselves. We've watched this country completely implode under the leadership of Joe Biden. And even before that, we saw the woke agenda of the left completely trying to separate Americans with things like CRT and trying to define us based upon our color of our skin, not the content of our character. They've done it to themselves with these totalitarian policies that only seek to divide Americans and to consolidate power within the Democrat Party. And they did it to themselves when grandma was dying. Nancy Pelosi was going to get her hair done. When Americans were watching getting pink slips and losing their jobs, you had people like Barack Obama and AOC throwing parties and living on a different standard. That do as I say, not as you see me do. That doesn't work anymore, and Americans are tired of it, and they're going to be rewarded in the midterms for doing what's right and standing up for freedom.
He brought up white supremacy and said that Joe Biden said it was the biggest threat. No, the FBI says it's the biggest threat to democracy right now. But I'd like to tie that back to the big elephant in their big elephant room, which is, of course, the January 6th attacks. Unless we keep mentioning this, they are going to take the narrative. They're trying to distract away from the terrorist attacks that occurred. So when I go into these rooms, you don't have to answer the question the way they ask it. You don't have to respond to every attack. You just have to have your narrative, and enough of it.
Nomiki, I want to get to a couple of things with you, and you can roll in your rebuttal if you want. But let's pop up the Washington Examiner with this. The hold Democrats once had on cultural issues is breaking. Hence, why dozens of House Democrats are jumping ship now and retiring before the midterm elections, and why the party's House campaign arm warned its candidates this week that if they don't figure out how to combat the GOP's alarmingly potent culture war attacks, they will lose badly. And as of today, 30 House Democrats are either retiring or seeking a different office. Nomiki.
Well, it's a redistricting year, and so the same thing's happening on the Republican side. That's what happens every redistricting year. But, there was one line there that was very powerful. Combating the Republicans' rhetoric, right? Their attacks. This never let a good crisis go to waste. When Donald Trump was handed the responsibility of really making America the leader in combating COVID, what did he do? He was rallying against the American government and inspiring terrorist attacks on the Capitol.
That's not true.
So you want to talk about
absolutely not true.
Oh, goodness gracious.
All right, I'm going to step in there because you are putting incendiary things into the conversation. And I know that TW wants to rebut that. So quickly, and we'll come right back to you. Hold on, TW?
Yeah, there's no way we're going to sit here and pretend like Donald Trump was promoting terrorism. That you should apologize to American people for saying that. That's just not true. The reality is the reason Democrats are losing is because Joe Biden has told us over and over that the #1 problem in America is white supremacy, and it's not. That's not what's facing Americans. The people that are losing their jobs is not
I'm going to go back to Nomiki now. I just wanted you to respond on that one point.
Young lady, I live it. I don't have to get paid for it.
Don't call me young lady, sir. I'm a
bless your heart, ma'am.
I'm a grown woman, and you can come up with all the code you want. But the FBI said that the #1 problem in America right now is white supremacy, organized white supremacy. That
ask the people who lost their job if it's white supremacy.
Of the Capitol. And so, let's talk about the people who lost their jobs, because Republicans are responsible for tax breaks for the wealthiest. They have no interest in unionized efforts. They're union busters. So if we want to talk about the real issues, you're making all these code words to distract away from the fact that people
Let's talk about the real issues.
And Republicans
Let's talk about the real issues.
Nothing to say.
So I want to jump back in here because the far left agenda in your party, and of course you were a surrogate for Bernie Sanders. So you saw that your party picked more mainstream, so they thought. That's not exactly what they're getting right now, but that's what they thought. So let's just go back to the idea that now your brand, so to speak, is getting voted out potentially. People are saying, no, we're done with this. We want you to focus on inflation and those bigger issues. What do you say about that?
If you look around the country to where the people who are not running for office again or switching districts, they're pretty much in more conservative districts. So those are the centrists of the party. Todd Kaminsky, a senator in New York, just said he was stepping down. Catherine Rice said she was stepping down. Those are the conservative Democrats who realize that working people they don't want business Democrats. They want Democrats who protect unions, organized labor. And all those attacks against the school boards right now, that's an attack against labor.
Harris, you've got to let me respond.
Let me hold on one second. Let me just put one more thing in here. In California, we're looking at erosion of support for Feinstein and Pelosi. Pelosi is not exactly in the middle mainstream right now. She's being pulled a bit to the left in the House by AOC and some of the other so-called squad members. So I hear what you're saying, but that is a cobalt blue state. And one in which progressive politics are very, very hot. I want to get to this. Turns out people in the Golden State, again, which is actually very blue, are souring on President Biden. A new poll shows that for the first time in that state, more voters disapprove of his job performance than approve of it. A huge change he had, as approval rating of nearly 60% just last summer, and won that state, both of them. That team right there on the screen won the state by 30 points. Brutal numbers for the Vice President, Kamala Harris, from her home state voters. Only 38% approve. What's happening out there? TW, I'm coming to you.
Well, you've got two real issues, I think, that are facing American people here. It's number one, COVID. The young lady on the panel mentioned the COVID numbers. More people have died from COVID under President under this president than died under Donald Trump. Biden has overseen the pandemic. He was handed not only a vaccine.
People who are not vaccinated
handed,
are dying.
That's not true. That's not true. People all over the world are dying because Joe Biden has failed to lead on the issue. And the second is the economy. They have been unable to generate an economy
and Nomiki, thank you.
All right, well, there you go. That's your semi-annual Fox News segment to take in. All right, there's a lot to unpack here. And many other shows have done it really well. The Humanist Report, I want to give a shout out to Michael over there. Did a great breakdown of this, but I really wanted to hone in on one point. If you want to get into the science and the art of fighting on Fox News, obviously it's difficult. You don't have a lot of time. I was cut off at the beginning and probably more so than usual. But what I really wanted to do there was steer the conversation away from their invented stories of wokeism and CRT and all this stuff that distracts away from the real issues and bring it back to really whatever wokeism is to them, racial justice to many people. What they call wokeism is the biggest issue right now, and not the white supremacy. Was that the most perfect debate I've ever had on Fox News? Without a doubt, no. But I got my 3 points in, knowing very well that there was going to be a circular firing squad and that they cut the segment for whatever reason at the end. So that was your dose and my explanation. Key point, when you find yourself in tough situations like that and someone's steering the conversation in one direction and then just keeps throwing out accusations after accusation to distract away from the main premise, bring it back to that Achilles heel that they have. The Achilles heel for the Republicans right now is January 6th. And if the Democrats and progressives were smart and want to keep those seats and win some back and keep the House, which, you know, historically is very difficult in midterms, then I would continue to bring up that this is the official endorsement of the Republican Party is the January 6th terrorist attacks. This guy didn't even have the message right because the RNC has endorsed it. And he's saying that Trump wasn't behind it. Well, we all know that's bullshit. So it's our job to make sure that's clear. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we are going to go into our first interview with Sophie Hurwitz. See this? Yeah, this is what happens when you don't take care of yourself. It was a strain that might be much worse. It's extremely painful and I'm not wrapping it right. As you can see, I probably have to tighten it. But that pain has really not been as intense as it should be, especially at night, given the scenario, because I am using Sunset Lake CBD. I have been doing the drops in my water at night. I'm putting the cream, the ointment on my hand because it is Sunset Lake CBD with arnica. It is really helping what I think is probably nerve at this point, the pain that I'm facing at night that just like pulses. It pulses. So anyways, that is my personal recommendation right now. Sunset Lake CBD is a fantastic product that I discovered probably at the beginning of the pandemic. There was a lot of anxiety at the beginning of the pandemic. And, I heard about it through Sam Cedar. He swore by it. He said, no, it's different than other CBD, which I had tried and wasn't really into. I didn't want to go the other route and be a little hazy all day. This has been an incredible solution. not only do I use it to help me sleep at night and with pain and joint issues, but it's a calming. Like, it's really, when I'm feeling stressed, I sometimes will take one of their CBD joints, and it just chills me out a little bit because these are stressful times. Sunset Lake CBD is a farmer-owned company that ships their craft CBD directly from their farm in Vermont to your door. They have all types of products, the tinctures, the gummies, the salves, coffee. My mom swears by that. And so does Dorsey. They can drink, you get the stimulation from coffee, but not the jitters. So it's a perfect, it's a perfect way to like keep drinking coffee all day long and not feel like, you're going to have a heart attack, basically. They originally took this amazing farm in Vermont that was a Ben & Jerry's farm, and they diversified it and decided to grow premium hemp. Not only that, they're a great company because, first off, when you're supporting them, you're supporting rural agriculture and economy. And in their company, their minimum wage is actually $15 minimum wage. But not just that, their employees own the majority of the company, and they support independent media that supports good labor standards, like our show, The Majority Report, and The David Pakman Show. For right now, if you go to sunsetlakecbd.com and you type in NOMI, N-O-M-I, you will get 20% off of your entire order. Just go to sunsetlakecbd.com and type in NOMI, and you will get 20% off your entire order. All right, welcome back. Sophie Hurwitz is a journalist based out of St. Louis, Missouri. She specializes in coverage of student movements, identity-based coverage of LGBT and Jewish issues, and works at the intersections of culture and environment. She has a piece out right now in The Nation titled "Amazon Warehouse Workers Want to Feel Safe." What a thought. Workers want to feel safe. Sophie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, you write this piece. Amazon is obviously not known for supporting its workers, but they have incredible campaign efforts to trick you otherwise, even if you are a worker. I mean, I was watching an ad yesterday on TV. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it was an Amazon ad. I caught it like midway through saying, we're so proud that we have a $15 minimum wage. And in many cities where it's more expensive to live, minimum wage is even higher. Mm-hmm. And we provide health insurance and we pay for college. And I was like, what is this? We are Amazon. Like, yeah. We also provide you water bottles to pee in when you're at the warehouse. Mm-hmm.
It's ubiquitous. Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is real. This one protest here stems out of this horrific situation that happened a few months ago, in which a warehouse collapsed on workers when many workers were asked to stay inside against really their own will. What's happening here right now?
What's happening with Amazon in Edwardsville?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I would say that people feel betrayed because, like you said, these ads basically telling people that this is one of the best jobs you can get, especially in a place like St. Louis. Like, we are a post-industrial, smaller sized metro area. There aren't a whole lot of jobs, especially jobs that you don't need an advanced degree for, that pay as well as Amazon does. That part is true. But then, like you said, the ads kind of promise that this will also bring a better life. It'll bring safety. It'll bring security. And I think that this warehouse collapse and the sort of uncaring showed to what workers need and even to workers' lives proves that that is not the case.
This was, of course, a tornado that hit the facility, and that day that occurred, I believe it was December 10th. Yeah. December 10th was the same day that the CEO of Amazon, the founder, or former CEO, I don't know what he is now, actually, but
Mr.
the founder,
Bezos, yeah.
Mr. Bezos, the man of Amazon, the founder,
Mm-hmm.
he was landing his spaceship.
Yeah, it really struck me how long it took him to acknowledge what was happening, especially like, I'm pretty young. I know a lot of people that work at Amazon that are very much just like me. And I was seeing like tweets that were like, oh my God, I'm one warehouse over. I could have been flattened. People trying to figure out where their cousins were, where their family members were. And meanwhile, Jeff Bezos is launching his rocket.
Literally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost poetic in a really dark way.
Mm-hmm.
But when the rocket landed or whatever, I don't know what you actually say. You say landed, parked. I have no idea.
I'm not sure either. I'm not a rocket scientist.
Exactly. And I'm not a billionaire. So when they landed the rocket and he got off and he was doing this press conference, it was eerie how out of touch he was, because even one of the women next to him who was, she has experience in space and was working with him, he said something like, and we wouldn't be able to do this without the workers of Amazon.
Yeah.
And her jaw dropped on stage because, of course, this had occurred, not like during the time they were there.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he didn't acknowledge the workers who had been killed. So, this is not a great media narrative for him. Let's just start off with that.
No.
So what are they doing there now? I mean, this is, you had workers who died. Their family has been affected. One of the worker's father said, my daughter was not expendable at a rally on January 27th. What are they trying to do? Are they just raising awareness? Is there a unionization effort there now?
I think what they want is primarily for Amazon to keep their promises from those ads. I think what they want is for Amazon to keep their promises and for Amazon to actually deliver on the working environment that they promised. That could certainly involve unionization. I know that many, many different workers' unions, and I think this is a really interesting point, have been supporting the Edwardsville Amazon workers. Like, you have people across industries. You've got fast food workers, you've got Teamsters, you've got, sheet metal workers, and they all came through to this rally. I was just struck by, I showed up, there's just like a line of union trucks and union cars from a bunch of unions, some of which I hadn't even heard of. And so I think the inter-industry solidarity and the recognition that, what happens to an Amazon worker happens to all workers, particularly given that Amazon workers make up like a massive percentage of workers in the US now, right? I think that was really striking. I also think it's connected to Amazon unionization efforts like the one in Bessemer, like the one in Staten Island, I actually just spoke to a Staten Island Amazon union worker who says that they're currently in contact with folks at 20 different warehouses in 12 different states across the nation. So I very much do think it's all connected. I think it's just workers asking to be treated as human.
Are we seeing any of the unions that have shown up in solidarity working in conjunction with Amazon workers on the ground about potentially unionizing there? I mean, there are all different types of union strategies where existing unions, local unions, will come in and assist, even if it's not necessarily it may not be the same union that Bessemer used, or in Staten Island, they're organizing their own union. Is there any union on the ground that's looking into this, as far as you know?
I don't know if there is a specific union that is the forerunner right now. I do know that the Missouri Workers Center is a group of people that have connections with a lot of different unions that have been talking to the Amazon workers and have been working with them. And so I think that if I were to make a guess, any unionization effort would likely come through there and would likely be very connected to the other ones across the country.
Very interesting. How are the families doing? Has Amazon taken care of the families in any way?
I know that there was some kind of, frankly, token effort towards doing so. Like, I believe Amazon donated about $1 million to relief efforts in Edwardsville, which sounds like a lot, but is really small considering Amazon's profits, right? Yeah. And I do know that, of course, they released practically the equivalent of a Notes app apology, I would say, to the families. I know that one girl I spoke to was actually the cousin of one of the women who was killed in the warehouse. And she started working at another Amazon warehouse the week after her cousin was killed. So I think that really speaks to sort of the conditions and sort of the way that Amazon sees people as interchangeable. Sometimes literally, one woman dies, another woman from her exact same family comes in and starts working. So I would say that the prevailing feeling among workers I spoke to was, no, they're not doing enough to support them.
And in terms of the workers that were affected because this warehouse was crushed, I mean, have they been able to work in other facilities?
I know that most of them have mostly just been transferred to other warehouses in the area. This was not the only warehouse building in the Edwardsville/Greater St. Louis area. There are several. And my sense from speaking with a few workers is just that they were transferred over to other buildings, just kind of slotted in elsewhere in the machine.
Well, this is just, it's such a tragic story and another example of really the effect that this company, which has had record profits and Bezos's own personal wealth has doubled since the pandemic started. But to the juxtaposition, of course, is really horrible. And why we have labor laws in this country that seem to have withered away. But really, thank you so much for joining us and giving us a breakdown of what's happening. Please keep us in the loop if anything does happen on the ground in terms of unionization. We'd love to have you back on.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. Sophie Hurwitz, her article is out in The Nation right now. Amazon warehouse workers want to feel safe. It was published yesterday. All right, we will be right back. We're going to be talking to Natasha Lennard from The Intercept. All right, guys, we are independent media. Shocker. We don't depend on corporate interests. We are not relying on the big bucks coming in from Google anytime soon. They have definitely not been helping out the left media over the last year and a half. So we are relying on our loyal listeners, the ones who tune in regularly or try to tune in regularly and are committed to supporting progressive independent media. Because let me tell you something, if it doesn't financially work, we don't exist. This is an operation. We have producers. We have to buy lights and sound and all sorts of stuff. It's a lot of work. It may look easy. Some folks like to sit there and stream for 32 hours straight. We actually put a lot of thought into our show and have really incredible guests, but we're able to do that because of our patrons. And it is not only hard to be on the left, it's also very hard to be from marginalized communities, and women in particular are really getting hit hard in the media. So you are definitely our patrons, literally our patrons. If you are not already a patron and you can afford to do so, maybe now's the time. Now is the time. Go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. There's lots of swag available to certain patrons. You can get a mug, you can get a bag, you can get some stickers. We have exclusive content. We're going to be doing some meetings in a couple of weeks exclusively for our patrons. Go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And if you are not already listening to us on the other platforms, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes. You can find us on the whole array. It's going to, yep, there it is, right up on screen. Go check us out in all of the places you can get podcasts, but definitely check us out on Patreon and, of course, Apple Podcasts. Just subscribe to all of them. It doesn't cost, if you're on them, just do it. I have 3 different podcast platforms, maybe 4. That's what you got to do. very excited about our next guest. Natasha Lennard is a great reporter. She's a columnist for The Intercept. Her work has appeared in The Nation, Bookforum, and The New York Times, among others. And she teaches critical journalism at the New School for Social Research in New York, and is the author of Being Numerous, Essays on Non-Fascist Life. Love that. What it means to be a non-fascist today.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So this trucker protest, we've probably done like 10 segments on this. And very early on, I mean, other than the fact that it seemed to just, it was like a media frenzy over what started off to, it was aggravating, but was not a large protest, but it's visibly large, like they're actual trucks. And then to see how the idea spread and really how it came about and the funding behind it. The right wing is just so good at political jiu-jitsu. And a lot of times the media and we on the left fall for it. I really like what you have to say here. So what can we learn from these protests?
Right. So, writers and broadcasters on the left, we do find ourselves in a difficult position sometimes of trying to figure out whether drawing any attention, even critical attention, to these sort of constellations, these sort of aggravations, whether we're actually kind of helping give platform and spread. And yeah, partly for that reason, and partly just taking some time to think about it, I didn't actually write on the convoy until this week. So it had already been situated and holding space really quite successfully it was heading into just past the third week. So, it sort of felt like, okay, I'm not kind of escalating the attention on something that, at the end of the day was holding up and disrupting a major capital in a powerful country, taking space, building a city within a city, in front of the Canadian Parliament. I was also noticing that on a number of, far left signal threads and community groups, which I am part of, there was this almost prurient interest and questioning of like, ooh, is there a kind of anti-authoritarianism here that we shouldn't be neglecting? Which I found a certain discomfort with, because like, sure, you can squint, as I put in my article, and see beyond the kind of obviously individualist and violent resistance to any COVID protections being mandated, the possibility of a kind of working class, disaffected, anti-state, anti-authoritarian position. But as I say, if you squint too hard, your eyes are closed. And we can't be blind to there being really an essentially undergirding individualist, white settler colonialist ideology driving this, even if there are some kind of naive fellow travelers. This isn't some organic working class uprising that we could maybe find and bring to our side. There's too much undergirding, I would say. Yeah, whiteness, this idea of we should be able to travel freely and potentially spread disease across borders, especially considering these being, the occupied lands of Canada and the United States. There is a kind of echoing of that history of settler colonialism in this. Even if there are, a number of people of color who are taking part in this protest. But what I do point out or argue for is that while obviously we can have sympathy for Ottawans in the neighborhood who are like, God damn it, please, can I have some sleep? Fair enough. I think from the left, our problem with this convoy and the other kind of copycats it might inspire and probably will around the world, and already is not disruption. It's not the fact that it takes up this kind of circulation struggle. I think the way in which indigenous groups from, Standing Rock being a kind of huge example in our country, the United States, of an incredible intervention in circulation struggle. And that's what, a lot of the Occupy encampments tried to do. So this idea of interjecting ourselves disruptively into the way capital flows and the way the movement of people is stopped, I think is strategically important. But that's just a tactical point. And certainly it's not like these truckers are the first people to do that. They've been able, up until this point where the police are moving in more aggressively, to hold space quite successfully. Some good strategy going on there, but also a lot of leniency from the police because of a lot of ideological agreement.
Well, they also have trucks. So it's not, they are also in massive trucks. So it's not like they're protesters chaining themselves in front of the Capitol or to Zuccotti Park. It's, these are semi trucks and
right. And also I was thinking, which I didn't include in my article, I can recall I wrote a profile in a broader feature about the prosecutions after Standing Rock. And there was indigenous water protector who did end up going to jail, whose name was Rattler. And he was also a semi-truck driver. And he would be bringing supplies to the Standing Rock occupation and prayer camp consistently throughout the encampment. And so I was like, we have examples of really beautiful uses of semis for like our team. So I don't feel like we should cede that to the right at all. And nor should we be compelled by something that is kind of liberatory in name, but takes up a very troubling notion of individualistic freedom.
But this is, we're watching footage, by the way, of what had happened today, actually, in Ottawa. The police did move in. Still difficult, but yes, they moved in. And part of that is just, Trudeau has responded in a much more aggressive way than we probably are used to in this country when it comes to right-wing protests, especially if we're under presidents that are from the right, hence the Capitol riots. But, the other side of this is, well, you had a Standing Rock protester who's a trucker, and that's incredible and beautiful. It's rare, partly because, this is a predominantly male, white group of workers who are on the road an average of 300 days a year. This is insane to me. Listening to right-wing radio, because let's be real, there's no, I'm going to guess, like the one left-wing radio show, not listening to NPR. Just gonna throw it out there. Probably not. Yes. And then they've got, they're disconnected from each other, so it's harder to have community. Maybe at truck stops, but you probably don't see the same people on a regular basis, so it's harder to communicate with each other about the actual issues, which are the working conditions. The working conditions are incredibly difficult, isolating. I'm sure there's depression and exhaustion, and there was that case in Colorado, notably, about the trucker who veered off, was under trained and killed a family, and it was an incredibly tragic story. But this is an industry that is ripe for sort of a protest of some sort, but the conditions are also not set up to have like a unionized effort. Everyone's isolated from each other and listening to right-wing propaganda. And it's not like, there's kind of like a form of independence associated with it, rather than like, say, Starbucks workers, who many of them are very educated, younger, and mobilized in other areas. And, the conditions are happening everywhere. It's just the scenario is not really set up for like a left-wing trucker protest.
Well, yeah, it's hard. But also, to be clear, like when we say the truckers, we're using such a shorthand when we're talking about the convoy. Of course, most truckers, again, are, and even many people involved in that protest, it's been reported, are vaccinated. But even so, like, most truckers are not remotely involved in any sort of freedom convoy. So I don't think we have a kind of trucker problem. But I think the conditions you mention that can be conducive to that sort of right-wing manipulation are very much at play, and certainly not only with trucking, but by the same token, if you'd asked me 6-7 years ago, how do you think the unionization efforts are going to go in Starbucks, or how do you think the unionization efforts are going to go in at Amazon, I would have been like, ooh, that's a toughie.
Right.
These are precarious laborers on 0-hour contracts, but we have seen that shift. So, but notably those shifts happen, yes, there is a certain amount of salting sometimes, but also because a lot of kind of proletariat movements do know what is good and communal and collective, and creates better positions, and do know that who their real class enemy is. So I don't think we need to kind of be too petrified of a unbreakable false consciousness. But at the same time, it's not going to happen because we're like, oh, maybe we can sneak into this kind of set of protests we really disagree with and try and kind of lure people away. It's more about, okay, now how do we take it to the bosses? How do we take it to the major companies with workers, and sort of rather than try and do things on right-wing terms, because that's what liberals do.
That's exactly. Thank you. Put that on a sign and tattoo on my arm. I don't know, whatever you want to say.
That's what liberals do. Also, I mentioned in my column at the kind of conclusion-y bit that because I'd noticed that in some of these kind of chats I mentioned, where people were kind of curious and sometimes a little bit too curious about the constituents of these protests, they mentioned, well, think about the yellow vests in France, and how, that was a huge broad working class movement, but definitely had, not an insignificant far right element.
Yes.
And not insignificant, from certain corners, fascist demands against
That's
immigration, right. Not insignificant anti-Semitism, not insignificant anti-Semitic attacks. But yet, of course, you also had, under the umbrella of the Yellow Vest movement, of the uprising at the time, anti-fascists taking it to private property, taking it in the streets against fascist police, and also within the movement trying to expunge fascist elements as much as possible. The comparison is interesting. One distinction I would draw, though, is that a kind of generalized working class uprising will always be difficult and have conflicting internal politics that I don't think we should necessarily be okay with. Like, I don't think we should be like, oh, cool, the fascists can like stay as fascists. But at the same time, the way in which the Yellow Vests were taking on neoliberalism per se, or at least it kind of evolved into that, and it became a broader working class movement. I don't see the same being kind of possible in the very DNA of these freedom convoys, given how they're very much committed they are to a kind of individualist notion of freedom, and a white supremacist one at that, even if not everyone is white. That's not the condition of white supremacy. But also I wanted to draw specific attention to a kind of a movement within a movement, and also a movement in some conflict with a movement, which was the Black Vests, which was probably the largest existing collective of undocumented immigrants in France, who also used kind of the same intersection disruptive tactics, storming airports, occupying the Charles de Gaulle airport, which is like France's most kind of largest airport, to in resistance to Air France's complicity with deporting refugees and immigrants. So this kind of using the tactics, and even using the kind of vests working class umbrella, but on anti-fascist, anti-racist, anti-border, anti-state terms, I think is that kind of move we should be looking for and looking at. And if there's a response to these freedom convoys that speaks that kind of language of deploying tactics towards actually liberatory aims, that's where we should be putting our attention and support. And it's not like indigenous wetland and water protectors aren't already doing that and need support.
Right, exactly. And part of it is also just like how we are structured here. It's I can't even imagine Capitol riot protesters aligning with union workers in Bessemer anytime soon. But with that being said, sometimes it happens where the yoga movement, for instance, the spiritual wealth, and maybe folks who voted for Bernie Sanders are now fully on board with the anti-vax pipeline that leads to far right. It seems structured a little bit differently here. if that were to happen, I mean, what if, someone listening says, I'm going to start a Facebook page or whatever you do nowadays, looking for my fellow leftist, my fellow leftist members of this industry. I mean, whether it's actual long haul truckers or people in the trucking industry, I imagine, who are, who want to use their labor as a weapon against these really exploitative. I mean, it's extremely exploitative and extremely dangerous on top of it. How the companies are running these the trucking companies.
I mean, that would be great, but I'm not going to tell people what to do.
No, I think you should just listen.
And I'm sitting here in Brooklyn with a English accent. No, I'm not in community with that many long haul truckers, and that's probably a problem of how my life is organized potentially. But I wouldn't presume there aren't people within the trucking industry who are trying to make those moves and who already are. I couldn't speak to that. I think my column in that sense was more aimed towards a left being enamored by a spectacle of disruption without thinking of some of the underlying ideologies.
I want to shift gears real quick before you leave. You have this other piece out right now, and I guess briefly help us understand what's happening with Alabama right now. You have a piece in the Intercept titled "Supreme Court's Alabama Ruling is a Major Step Towards Dismantling the Voting Rights Act," which of course has already been under attack. And Democrats just don't, in power, just don't seem like they care that much. So
right.
what's happening here?
And this was from a couple of weeks ago when, for context, the Voting Rights Act has been being eaten away at for decades now. So it's, certainly not the robust, or at least somewhat robust legislation that it was built to be, by the early 80s when Section 2 was legislated and passed. So, we find ourselves at a moment with an extremely far-right court, with, feckless corporate Democrats who would rather not do away with the filibuster, not pass new voting rights legislation, and allow the continued disenfranchisement of Black people. So that's where we're at. And then there was as part of a kind of long history of right-wing racist gerrymandering, there was a redrawn district map in Alabama that was put into place by the Alabama legislature, right wing of course, that very much violated the Voting Rights Act and its demand that there not be voter dilution, and this would have meant that of the 7 voting districts in Alabama, only 1 would have Black majority representation. So you have 27% Black population in Alabama, but according to the redistricted map, there would only be kind of 14% in terms of how representation would work.
Wow.
So there was a lawsuit to stop this and demand that they redistrict, that this map not be deployed, and there be at least 2 majority Black districts, in accordance with the Voting Rights Act. And a federal court held that this new Republican map had to be redrawn, that it was in violation, and that it had to be redrawn. Within a shadow docket decision, so that's one of the ones where they're not hearing oral arguments, it's like a kind of swift, allegedly emergency order, putting things in place for later, future oral decisions in the Supreme Court, which is being used more and more in kind of a dodgy way. In one of those, the Supreme Court voted to freeze that panel of federal judges' orders to say, look, you can't ask for them to redraw this Republican racist map, got to keep the racist map, which will then, at least be in place for the 2022 primaries and elections. So you've got a kind of racist map held in place by the Supreme Court, who will further consider arguments around this map in the next session. The problem is the rulings we can expect once oral arguments come to bear are not promising, given the makeup of this court. In fact, it's very troubling because in the decisions around this shadow docket order, you already had justices like Brett Kavanaugh say, what we really need to look at in the next session is the scope of this very crucial part of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, which allows plaintiffs, for example, minority plaintiffs, to say, we are having our votes diluted. We want to take this case to federal court and potentially to the highest court. And so if he says, Kavanaugh is saying, this is an incredibly confusing and there's been, histories of uncertainty with this Section 2. Not true. It's been standard case law for 40 years now, since 1982.
Wow.
And sure, there's been a couple of disagreements about it, but it's not something that the kind of judicial landscape has never been able to handle. This is clearly a very intentional, very clear, naked effort to just completely decimate the Voting Rights Act, to kind of establish the acceptedness of racial gerrymandering, that classic refrain of the racist, which is it's racist to talk about race, which you're seeing at play here every time these cases come up. So that's a threat, that there could be this removal or even further gutting of the Voting Rights Act, such that there is no standing for those who feel their votes are being disenfranchised or diluted. We now, even since I wrote that article, another troubling case has reached the federal court level and has been ruled on by a judge, which is an Arkansas case that quite specifically is trying to establish that the only body that could sue about Voting Rights Act's discriminatory violations would be an attorney general or a district attorney. So basically saying, private plaintiffs, citizens who feel that that their rights are being violated, that their votes are being threatened, couldn't do it, because at the time the Voting Rights Act was originally passed 56 years ago, Congress did not explicitly say, and private citizens can do this, and they can be the plaintiffs, and the state doesn't need to be the only plaintiff.
Private citizens have the right to sue whoever. I mean, this just seems.
Well, apparently this is because it's about kind of what the state is permitted to do as state, but it's nonsense. It's another kind of naked effort to disenfranchise people of color, because at the time, historically, you didn't need, it was considered a standard when Congress passed the Voting Rights Act that the plaintiffs could be any given citizen. Were, centrist Democrats, right-wing Democrats to actually enact voting rights legislation now, of course, that could be put clearly and could set new precedent for what voting rights legislation is, such that any of this alleged confusion, which is in fact not confusion, could be outright cleared up. But of course, they're not going to do that. And then they're going to lose the House and the Senate. So here we are. But no, it's troubling, and it's where things have been heading for a long time. But yes, now we have one case that is going to be considered that's on the books to be considered in the next session, which is this Alabama map case. And now we also have a federal judge ruling that private citizens can't take these kind of Section 2 issues. They can't have standing in these cases. So, there's two options for the Supreme Court to rest upon to kind of have their racist, fascistic dreams come true.
No, literally. I mean, it's so egregious at this point. It's almost too much to process, I think, for most people. But also to sit there and just watch the Biden administration not even utter a peep about it.
Right. And this is the thing. There's just, of course, there needs to be a dramatic undoing of the standards that our judicial system has, including the Supreme Court and their power. And but, in terms of immediate possibilities, that feels like kind of very difficult and very far off. Not that we should not think about it. But obviously, we do have an elected Congress that is being, and a president who are, just being disgracefully pathetic and enabling at this point, and, should never be allowed to forget it and should see no peace.
Listen, I mean, they're the biggest donors of the Democratic Party. When the Capitol that runs the party says, we are not giving you money until you deal with voting rights as a party, the curtain's pulled back. What is going on with the Biden administration? If they're not answering to Capitol, then who do they answer to?
I mean, it's, this is an ongoing question where, we could talk forever about some sort of like internal intent, desire to lose, desire to just impossible incapacity to do politics, even in a self-serving way. And, I can't begin to tell you what the drives of these people in power are. But we have more than enough evidence in effect to know that it's unacceptable. And, we should make their lives incredibly uncomfortable. And, a lot of people invest in doing that. But in the meantime, we also have to be, working with each other and supporting each other, because it's become quite clear that those in power won't.
100%. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us. This is a really fascinating conversation about both the long haul truck movement that's happening, and of course, voting rights, which is always under attack. Thank you so much, Natasha. Natasha Lennard writes a column for The Intercept. Go check her out. Make sure to subscribe to her column or put alerts on. I don't know how you do it at The Intercept. I just get the email thing that you guys send, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Makes it so easy. Go sign up for the email thing. Yeah. Thank you so much, Natasha. And to everybody else, we're going to take a quick break, and we are going to go into an interview that we did yesterday with Steven Donziger, who has been on the show multiple times to discuss the prosecution against him for winning a case against Chevron, a $9.58 billion case against Chevron, and they are going after him. Well, they did something else in the last week that is pretty egregious and unheard of, and we're going to talk to him about that.
Everybody, I'm back home after 5 pretty harrowing days spent locked up in a halfway house in the Bronx. The windows were nailed shut. There was very little ventilation, and they wouldn't let me out, unlike every other person in the halfway house. I literally just got fresh air for the first time today after 5 days. Last Wednesday I got this bizarre call in the morning. My son had just gone to school. He's in 10th grade, and it said, come in, bring clothes. And they wouldn't tell me why. I got there, they still wouldn't tell me why. 36 hours passed, and I was just sitting there, had to stay there overnight. My son came home from school that day, and his dad was gone, and we had no explanation as to when I might be back. I was really worried they were going to try to put me in prison. They finally told me what the problem was, which was that they violated me because I had been in my building, in my apartment building, but not in my apartment for a couple of hours for a meeting. Frankly, this is nonsense. And while I respect the procedures and the conditions of my very unjust and I would say illegal confinement, this was highly unusual, and I strongly suspect Chevron and its lawyers are behind it. In any event, thanks to Amnesty International, Representative McGovern, my lawyers, Ron Kuby, and thousands of people around the world who stood by me and demanded I be returned home, which finally happened today. This is an example of how Chevron still wants to disrupt my human rights work and to attack me as a way to avoid paying the judgment to the indigenous peoples in Ecuador who the company poisoned by deliberately dumping 16 billion gallons of toxic waste in the Amazon. We need to protect me. We need to force this company to pay what it owes to the people of Ecuador. If you can help us, again, I urge you, please go to our website, freedonziger.com. One word, freedonziger, Donziger. We need resources to deal with this monster polluter called Chevron and its attacks on me and other advocates who are working to enforce this judgment to help the indigenous peoples of the Amazon. Again, it's freedonziger.com. I'll give more details later. I'm so happy to be home. And I thank everyone who helped and stood by me. I felt the solidarity. Lots of love. I'll be reporting back soon.
Hello and welcome to a special segment on the Nomiki Show. We are really grateful to have Steven Donziger with us today. Steven Donziger is, of course, the famous lawyer who won that historic judgment against Chevron. It was a $9.5 billion judgment, and they did not take that lightly. We've, of course, covered his case extensively on the show, but you've just seen that video and got a little brief overview of what happened. But Steven, thanks for joining us. And I know you're very, very busy. There's a lot happening, but we wanted to initially we were going to have one of your attorneys on, but you actually were released from the halfway house a couple of days ago. And first off, how are you feeling?
Well, it's great to be with you again, Nomiki. I love your show, love what you do, and I have a lot of support for your independent journalism. I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, it was a harrowing experience to be just taken for no reason out of your home in front of your kid. It was tough, but I'm strong and I'm back. Once again, I actually believe that with the help of so many supporters around the world, including Amnesty International and independent journalists and Amazon Watch and so many people, Representative Jim McGovern from Massachusetts was very helpful. That's why I'm home. I never really understood why I was taken. I don't completely understand why I was then released. It all seems very opaque and arbitrary, but I am home and still not free. I still have another 70 or so days until the end of my sentence. They put the ankle bracelet back on, which I wear 24/7. So I still live in confinement and the conditions are pretty oppressive, but they're much better than prisoner of the halfway house. I will say this, to kind of give people a sense of what I'm dealing with. Last night or overnight, literally at 4:15 this morning, my phone rang. And we have a landline here because as part of my conditions of home confinement, the Bureau of Prisons requires you to put in a land phone. We hadn't had one before. And I got a call on that phone. So whenever anyone calls me on that phone, because I don't give the number to anybody, I know it's the halfway house or the prison. So whenever it rings, it's scary because I don't know if they're going to say, come in, or we're going to pick you up. In any event, it rang at 4:15, woke us up. I had to then take a selfie and send it in to prove I was in my home, even though I have an ankle bracelet home, and I just answered a home phone. I mean, it's just insane.
Wait, so they just wanted to check in on you at 4:15 and have you send a selfie?
Yeah.
That was it?
Yeah, they in other words, the suspicion is like I'm not there. They want me to prove I'm in my own home at 4:15 in the morning, which is just preposterous. I mean, they can make that call at 11 p.m. and then at 7 a.m. I mean, why 4:15?
Yeah.
And also remember, I have an ankle bracelet on, so they know where I am anyway. So.
Okay, I have a few questions because you were released from the Danbury prison early, which is wonderful, due to a lot of support from externally and at the time when we interviewed you, I don't know if you've learned more about what led to that release, but also I in conjunction with that, I'm curious who oversees the halfway house. Is it the same people? Is it this? Where does the buck stop? I just don't understand. Where's the chain of command?
That's a key question that it's almost impossible to answer. Okay, this is what we know. And, first of all, respect to the Bureau of Prisons. I mean, they have a big job. They run a prison system with 150,000 bodies in over 100 facilities around the country. And that's a tough job. It's a multi-billion-dollar agency. I'm just a little tiny piece of that, right? But the way it works is when you get out of prison, most people don't go directly home. They go to a halfway house to transition you back into the community. And the halfway house has fewer restrictions than prison, but many, many more restrictions than you would have if you were just free on the outside. So the halfway house that I'm being overseen by now, even though I'm not physically there, they're the entity responsible for making sure I'm at home of confinement. They're part of a private company that is really, it's the former Wackenhut company, which Wackenhut is a private security company that used to run a bunch of private prisons. And they have a contract with the Federal Bureau of Prisons to put people in halfway houses and monitor them until they can be released, or in the event they're on home confinement, like me, monitor them on home confinement. So the people in charge run the halfway house. They're decent people, nice people, but they are carrying out a mandate that, is really designed to constantly remind everyone within it that, you don't have control over your life and they have control. And, the example of them calling me on my landline and just saying, hey, get some clothes together, you're coming in. So I'm essentially taken from my home by force, without knowing when I might come back. It's scary, and look, it happens to a lot of people. I mean, this is all new to me. So I'm like shocked by this. I mean, This is sort of how they just do things. And again, I think it's, I don't know what I can say about it, except that even though I'm home, I feel like there's a great deal of control over my life, and I really am not free.
You're home, and you're going to be monitored for a bit more time. How many more days?
Until April 25th. That's when my sentence ends. So it's about, a little over 2 months.
And then after a sentence, so if it was a traditional sentence, you would go to a halfway house. Are they going to make you go to a halfway house after your home sentence?
No.
Okay.
No. Okay. Basically, when you have a sentence of 6 months or less, which I do, you don't go to a halfway house.
Interesting. Okay.
You just serve your sentence. But I got released under a particular legal provision passed by Congress based on COVID. It's called the First Step Act. And it allows people 60 years of age or older who, are at risk for COVID. I'm 60, by the way. I just turned 60. To leave and serve out the rest of their sentences at home. So I got released under kind of a different legal provision. But normally people who serve long sentences end up at halfway houses before they go back to the community. And if you can't function well in a halfway house with all of those restrictions, sometimes they put you back in prison. In my particular case, in the halfway house, I was locked up there for 5 days because of this issue, this bizarre issue I had last week. I pretty much kept to myself. They wouldn't let me out. The windows were nailed shut. Couldn't get fresh air. Made no sense to me. But in any event, I met people in the halfway house who had literally been in prison. One man had been in prison 31 years.
Oh my
and he had just arrived at the halfway house 2 days before. He talked to me. And he asked me to help him set up his cell phone. He had never had a cell phone before. So there were people coming out of prison with really long sentences. By the way, that man I just talked about had a drug offense. I mean, he was distributing drugs, cocaine, crack, and the like at the height of the drug war in the 90s. And he just got completely slammed. So he had just spent from age 29 to 50, from 28 to 59, locked up in penitentiaries. And he literally had just shown up at the halfway house 2 days before, and he was the nicest man, and I I gave him a hug. And it breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart to see this.
So, our criminal justice system is clearly broken. After April 25th, what do you expect? Are they going to be done with you? Like, are you able to be a free man, or is there anything else that is still legally pending?
Well, I expect this nightmarish ordeal to be over at that point. And now Chevron, which is behind all of this, still has a civil case that they're pursuing against me.
Okay.
And who knows what might come of that. I have lawyers, and hopefully this will end April 25th, or there'll be some additional things that need to be dealt with, but nothing of this sort. I mean, it's a civil case.
Yeah.
And this criminal contempt charge was just unprecedented. And, I hope it never happens again to me or anybody else. I will say that my conviction, I call my so-called conviction because I never had a jury, is under appeal.
It is. Okay.
It is under appeal. It's not final. And I hope to win my appeal.
And who, where does it go? Do you face different judges? Is it different?
Yeah, it goes to the federal appellate court that oversees the New York Federal Trial Court, which is called the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And it's already been argued before a 3-judge panel. My lawyer, Steven Donziger, who argued it, fabulous guy. He is a professor of law at the University of Texas at Austin Law School. He's an intellectual, a scholar, and a really good lawyer and a good moral advocate. So he argued for me. The issue fundamentally is the private prosecution, that I was prosecuted by a private law firm that had Chevron as a client, which is a flagrant conflict of interest. And my private prosecutor who worked for the Chevron law firm, Rita Glavin, was totally unsupervised by the Department of Justice. And those issues are extremely problematic and unprecedented. And we believe it, make my whole case unconstitutional and illegal. And, we're hoping they'll throw it out. But what's interesting about that, even if I win my appeal, think about all the pain and suffering I've had to endure in a case that I won.
Right.
Almost 3 years in detention, either in prison or at home with an ankle bracelet. So, the judges who want to abuse their power are able to inflict a whole lot of punishment without a conviction. Again, I was 2 years, 2 months in home detention before I even had a trial. So even if it ultimately gets corrected in the eyes of the law, as I hope this does, the punishment still happened. And, a lot of the judges who really, I think the 2 judges I've had to deal with who I don't think, take their ethical duties with enough seriousness, they, I believe, abused their power to impose punishments on me before I could even get a trial. And then the trial I had no jury, and it was not a fair trial, as has been determined by 9 international legal scholars, including the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention from the United Nations, which, by the way, has ruled my detention as arbitrary and violates multiple provisions of international law. So, Nomiki, we're calling on the Department of Justice of the United States, Attorney General Garland, to take back this case from the Chevron law firm. Just take it back, take control of it, and dismiss the charges. I mean, everybody knows that, what I did, which was really to appeal a civil discovery order, is not a criminal act of contempt. Never has been charged that way in American history against any lawyer. They need to take the case back, dismiss the charges, and get this case in our country back in conformity with international law. You should not have human rights lawyers in America detained for even a day, much less 3 years. That's you sometimes hear about that in other places, Russia.
Of course, yeah.
Russia. I mean, look at the Khashoggi case in Saudi Arabia. I mean, you see these brutalization of human rights lawyers and advocates in many countries. I'm calling on President Biden and Attorney General Garland to be sure that does not happen in this country. It is happening, though, to me. Please correct it, please.
And this is in light of a Supreme Court justice conversation in which in many cases, across the country, the judges that have been appointed by Biden have been more progressive than I think many would have expected at the lower courts. But, the conversation about Michelle Fields is that she is her experience is protecting corporations. She was an employment attorney, but on the employer side, union busting and discrimination cases, the majority of her work when she was a partner at her law firm was doing that work. So if there's ever a moment to have a deep conversation about the impact of major corporations over our judicial system, I think this is the time. And if President Biden wants to show that he really is not on the sides of these monopolies, then this would be a very easy thing for him to step in and act on in Merrick Garland. What's happening with the judgment?
So just so people understand, we have, or the people of Ecuador, the indigenous peoples and farmer communities, are owners of a $9.5 billion pollution judgment that Chevron is refusing to pay, even though it's been affirmed by multiple appellate courts around the world, including the entire Supreme Courts of Ecuador and Canada, affirmed for enforcement purposes. Chevron is, I believe, attacking me to try to disable my advocacy to lessen the risk of those judgments being enforced. But there are other lawyers working on them. And the plan of the communities is to enforce those judgments against Chevron's assets in other countries outside the United States, including Canada and other places, to ensure Chevron complies with the rule of law and addresses the poison it literally dumped deliberately onto ancestral lands down in the Amazon. So the case is very much alive. Look, I don't think Chevron will be paying 60 law firms and using 2,000 lawyers to do what they're trying to do to me if they didn't feel tremendous risk from this judgment. This case is alive, and the communities plan to make sure it gets enforced against Chevron.
Is there a fear that this is going to open up other cases, other lawsuits in different parts of the world where similar, negligent acts have taken place with Chevron and other oil companies?
You mean fear in Chevron?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, look, Chevron knows better than anybody that it has, 100 billion plus liability around the world because of all its acts of pollution in dozens of countries, which, by the way, have been documented in a fabulous report by Dr. Nan Greer recently. But, I think Chevron probably feels like if the indigenous peoples of Ecuador recover the money in this case, even though they've been out there for 50 years, drinking poison water, they fear that it'll inspire other vulnerable communities in other countries to do the same thing. So, I think they're spending massive sums of money to prevent the Ecuadorians from enforcing their judgment. Part of that is to spend money to, hurt me and disable my advocacy. Even though I'm locked up, by the way, I'm still here, and I don't think they have succeeded. Because there's lawyers literally flooding into the case, seeing what's happening to me. I mean, people don't like it, and they particularly don't like it when you're attacking a lawyer I've spent 28 years. I've been to Ecuador 250 times from my home in New York, trying to work with the indigenous peoples in the northern Ecuadorian Amazon region to really make sure they get a remedy for this awful pollution problem, which is called the Amazon Chernobyl. It's probably the world's worst oil-related disaster. And I say disaster advisedly in the sense that, it didn't just happen because of an accident, like, say, the BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico. This was part of a deliberate design by Texaco, now owned by Chevron, to externalize the cost of production onto some of the most vulnerable communities on the planet. And, over time, they were down there 25 years doing this, from the, 70s, the 80s into the early 90s. And at the height of the operation, they were literally discharging 4 million gallons per day of scalding hot water of formation that contained cancer-causing benzene and other harmful toxins. And this stuff was just being dumped into rivers and streams that Chevron knew local inhabitants, local residents were drinking out of. Because people who grow up in the forest, they're rich. They get fresh water naturally. They don't have to go to the faucet like we do, or buy a bottle of water out of the store like we do in New York or other parts of the United States. They had their water, and it was all poison, but it was poison in the worst way possible by a company that never told people of the health impacts of what it was doing. So people kept drinking it, and I can't tell how many people have passed away because of exposures to toxins in that water and in the food and in the air. We don't know the precise number, but I would personally estimate thousands of people have died of cancer because of what Chevron did and its failure to clean up.
You mentioned that lawyers are flooding your case, and that's really wonderful. I imagine that the legal community, at least individuals, have probably come to you, and lawyers are concerned that, if these kinds of actions can be taken against you, where does it stop? Conflicts of interest just seem to me, like glaring conflicts of interest seem to, I wouldn't even know as a lawyer. I wouldn't feel safe. I mean, who you can represent anymore, what you can try if you realize that they might go after you as an attorney.
Well, I think it's important that all attorneys stick together. I mean, no matter what your politics, whether you represent corporations or, victims of police abuse or human rights, victims of human rights abuses, like we have to stick together to protect the profession. I mean, it's totally unacceptable that a lawyer gets sued for doing his or her job successfully. I mean, that's just crazy. And you don't see that anywhere but the United States. I mean, I've done work in Canada with lawyers. They're like, that would never happen in this country. I mean, judges wouldn't allow it.
Right.
So, I don't think that should be legal. It happened to me. It's happened to other lawyers. And, we need to become aware of it. And, frankly, I could have gotten a whole lot more support from the legal profession in New York City. Not one of the bar associations has said a word about the attacks on me. Although I've gotten massive support from lawyers around the world, none from the place it's happening, because lawyers I think they're intimidated.
They're probably afraid too, because they're going to face that judge.
Yeah,
potentially.
that's exactly right. But still, I mean, speak.
Of course.
Come on. I mean, stand up for the fundamental principle that a lawyer should be allowed to do his or her job and litigate cases on the merits without being sued personally and then made this sort of weapon of mass distraction from what is a meritorious case, which is what Chevron has tried to do by suing me and putting me in this position. They would rather this be about me than about what they did to poison the Amazon and harm people down in Ecuador. And, we have to be cognizant of that. When I appear on these shows, I want to remind people, and again, I probably don't do it enough. This is fundamentally about the fact that indigenous peoples in Ecuador, in the Amazon, and farmer communities won a significant pollution judgment against Chevron, and the company is looking for ways not to pay it. So they're attacking me and trying to make me the issue. But I'm not the issue. The issue is Chevron's poisoning of indigenous peoples in Ecuador. Chevron lost the legal case. It's been affirmed by multiple appellate courts, 28 appellate judges in total. And the company still refuses to pay the judgment while people suffer and die as a result. That's the issue, not me.
That's right.
I'm just trying to put a voice to the issue and a voice on the people I've had the privilege of getting to know for 28 years as I've worked on this case, people down in the Amazon, who don't have access to these shows and don't have access to platforms like I do. So let's just be careful here to not get too caught up in the saga of Steven Donziger, although I will say I consider that important too, and I need protection and support. But also, let's not forget that, that the real issue is not me. It is what Chevron did to the people of Ecuador and the company's obstinate, and I would say unethical and illegal, refusal to comply with the law and pay the judgment that it owes, and that has been affirmed by multiple appellate courts around the world.
Well, I will say, your becoming part of the issue has definitely raised awareness of the actual issue, and it's that's what's so important when you come out and you speak. You're telling the story of their tactics, which are horrifying and dangerous to democracy, but simultaneously through that you're highlighting the absolutely egregious acts that they've taken and in killing people, poisoning people, indigenous people, and not paying for it. So
it's all connected. I don't mean to ignore me. And I'm happy to do what I do, and I'm totally happy to speak with you and others. But we need to be put into context.
Yes,
the attacks on me are happening because our team won the case.
Right.
And they're trying to distract attention from the fact they owe, $10 billion to the people of Ecuador. They don't want to pay it.
That's right. Stephen, what happens? What are you planning on doing after April 25th?
Well, I don't know. you know, I have a lot of things I want to do. I very much look forward to the future. I mean, part of my work will continue in terms of supporting the people of Ecuador. I won't be out in front like I have been all these years. There will be other lawyers taking the lead. But I will be here and I will stand by my clients and do, you know, within reason what I can to contribute to, you know, the enforcement of the judgment. And apart from that, I plan to pursue some other, you know, personal projects, including some writing and some journalism. And, you know, I'm just very much looking forward to being able to resume, you know, a relatively normal life where I can be with my friends and family and
you can go take a walk in the park again.
I haven't been on a vacation for 3 years.
Oh my goodness.
And, you know, just go out to dinner on occasion and
some fresh air.
Get some fresh air. Although my windows are right here, they're open.
I saw a little breeze. I was like, uh-oh. They're going to feel it, you know, the breeze on your ankle.
I spent a lot of time sitting on the ledge next to
I see on your social media, the wine glass and the books.
I live on the 7th floor of an apartment building in Manhattan. And, you know, so we get a fair amount of light. And when the weather's nice, I open the windows, I sit and I'll take a book or the newspaper and I'll just stick my head out the window and I'll just read it, trying to get some sun. I mean, it's like little things like that that keep me relatively sane.
I remember my personal story. My grandmother was a teacher, and she was a teacher in Buffalo, but she loved going on vacations. And when one day, she was on a trip with my mom, and they were in Arizona, and they were driving to the airport, and my grandmother had the window down and her head out like this. She's like, I'm getting the last bits of sunlight I can before I go back. So we all do it.
I can relate, believe me.
Steven, thank you for everything, for your time, for your advocacy, for your courage, for sharing your story and really informing so many of us, teaching us about just you know, the injustices that have happened in the Amazon against so many indigenous people, but also the corporate tactics that are, you know, it's important for us to know.
Good. Well, thank you. And if I could just mention before we part ways here, if people want to learn more about the case in Ecuador, go to freedonziger.com. It's one word, free Donziger, Donziger. We also have a legal defense fund. I'm always hesitant to ask people for help, but we need help.
Yes.
There's no way around it. You need resources to survive these kinds of attacks and also to turn the tables and go after them so the people of Ecuador can finally get paid the judgment that they won. So you can donate also on the website. It's at freedonziger.com. By the way, if you can't donate, go anyway, sign up and look at the articles and learn more about it. We need people to help spread the word.
Absolutely. And we'll have that information up on screen as usual. Steven, thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you,
enjoy the fresh air. Hope it's sunnier today.
Take care.
And to everybody else, hope you have a great Friday. Make sure to check us out at TNS Live on Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. We start off on the platforms and then we move to rockfin.com/Nomiki, where we have extensive interviews with some of our favorite people. Make sure to check it out and go subscribe over there at Rockfin on Tuesday night for our live conversation, 8 p.m. Eastern. And of course, go check us out on all the podcasts, on wherever you find your podcast. You know, go find us there. And we'll see you next week. Take care and stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.